Welcome to the Inside the Vertical Mind podcast, hosted by Don McGrath. Each episode focuses on a different psychological or social aspect of climbing. You won't hear about the latest hard sends by big-name climbers. You will hear from people more like you who have interesting stories and perspectives about climbing and what it means to be a climber.
Hey, this is Don McGrath, and welcome to the Inside the Vertical Mind podcast. I'd like to give a shout out to our sponsors. Trango Climbing Gear and Holds makes innovative climbing gear that climbers trust. And they make a wide variety. Go to trango.com. You can see shoes and ropes and harnesses, ice gear, all kinds of stuff to help you be the extraordinary athlete that you can be. They believe everyone deserves to be an extraordinary athlete, extraordinary climber. And so go there and check out all their great stuff. And Sharp End Publishing, Fred Knapp and the team at Sharp End Publishing, they publish award-winning climbing books, guidebooks, and other kinds of books that are just fantastic. And everything they do, all the work they do, is fueled by a passion for climbing. Go to sharpendpublishing.com. One of the books that they produced, that they have published, is this book, Vertical Mind. I'm a co-author of this book, and this book's been out about 10 years. And this has actually been an inspiration for putting together this podcast, some of the things that have come from the book and the work that's been done since then. And I thought, what a better way to kick off this podcast, to have the first episode, than to have as my guest the other co-author of Vertical Mind, Professor Jeff Elison, who is not only my great friend, a really, really smart guy and great climber and really, really funny. So Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Don. It's great to see you again.
Yeah. So
I just want to underscore
stuff.
your shout out to Sharp End. Fred was amazing to work with. He decided he was so interested in our book that he decided to edit it himself. And it was a great experience.
Boy, to think it started out 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago, right? What do you remember about that? It started on a weekend where we climbed together, right?
Yeah. I remember vividly us being in Rifle, and I fired up some margaritas, and I don't even remember what we were eating. I just remember the margaritas. You, after a little while, decided to share your plans on this book, and a very brief kind of outline of what you had planned. And as a psychologist, I was like, oh boy, we could do another chapter on this and this and this. We got to get flow in there. And the rest of the night, I think, was spent talking about it. And then after that, we started exchanging emails, and it was pretty much full steam ahead from that first night.
Yeah, I remember we spent the weekend climbing. I remember Sunday, the second day, I didn't get up till like 10 o'clock. And that was your margaritas. Everybody else was gone from the camp because we had had such a great night the night before, having margaritas and talking about what would become Vertical Mind. We didn't know it was Vertical Mind at the time, but I was sharing with you some of the experimentation I've been doing, some of the research, some of the writing I've been doing. You started sharing with me. And it really came together quite quickly, right?
Yeah, it sure did. Yep. Yeah, after that, I would go to Rifle on a Friday night after work by myself and make dinner, make a margarita, cozy up in my 4-person tent. I had a little office set up with my cooler so I could not spill my margarita, and have my laptop going and bang out 20 or 30 pages. I'm not sure how the quality progressed as the night went on, but I always edited them sober. But it was a great experience. I've done a lot of, peer-reviewed journal articles, that type of writing. So to write something in this style, especially about climbing and psychology, it was really a lot of fun.
Yeah, so I remember we talked about the book, and I think we got together and just hashed out a real quick outline. I think we had one meeting, if I remember right. We just were like, okay, you do this and you do this. And you got in your tent, and I happened to go to the Grand Cayman. My wife, Sylvia, as a chef, went to a cooking, I don't know, it was a class or a seminar or something. So she went there, and I was kind of hanging out at the pool and hanging out at the beach, doing the same thing. I was writing. I think I was working on the Fear of Falling chapter quite a bit at that point. And it just started coming. It's just coming. And I think it was within 9 months, we had a completed manuscript that had already been edited a couple of times to Fred.
Oh yeah, yeah. I believe it was less than 9 months. Yeah, we did get another editor come in to do a first pass before we pitched it to a publisher, and then Fred decided to do it. But I mean, I think it came out that spring, and I think our first weekend at Rifle was in September. I could look it up in my climbing log, but yeah, it was amazingly fast to put together.
And I remember we didn't know it was going to be Vertical Mind. We had some other titles in mind, and everybody's like, I don't know about that. I don't know. I don't know. And I think I was on a trip. I lived in Fort Collins at the time, and I was on a trip, a work trip to Colorado Springs, and I was just noodling over it in my car. And I think, if my memory serves me right, is that the title Vertical Mind came to me as I was in the car driving from Colorado Springs to Fort Collins. And I remember sharing that probably with an email. I probably couldn't wait for a meeting. So I think I shared that with you and with Fred. And I think it was like, yes. And then you came up with the subtitle. And what was that subtitle?
Psychological approaches to optimal rock climbing. And we talked about some others, but we really honed in on the term optimal because we weren't just all about performance. I mean, the book obviously covers fear of fun, fear of failure, which affects your enjoyment of it. I mean, climbing ought to be fun a lot of the time. So, optimal, I think, captured both the performance and the enjoyment aspect of it. So yeah, I'm real happy with that. That's what we were targeting.
And, as I've talked to people about Vertical Mind and what it's done for them over the years, people talk about that a lot. That this book actually helps them in other aspects of their life. Because it's
Yeah,
not,
I think that go ahead, Don.
yeah, I mean, a lot of the concepts can be applied to performance in rock climbing, but many things are basic psychological science and practical drills to be able to change your mindsets around just having more fun and performing better at whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I always take it as a huge compliment when people say, "Oh, this helped me in other sports," or "This applies to any sport," and it absolutely does. But then, the biggest compliment of all is this helped me in my everyday life. It's helped me at work or even a relationship. These scripts that we talk about are basically just habits of thought and behavior. So there's something that can be changed with time and with practice.
That's one of the things I hear probably the most is A, thank you for writing this book. And B, like I use this in my everyday life. I mean, I use it in my climbing and I use it elsewhere. Um, you know, this book has had a lot of impact. I know we sold a lot of books, but I didn't really realize the impact this has had. But I would say in the last, I don't know, 5 years, I've had a number of people come up to me either at the crag or in climbing gyms and recognize me for some reason and say like, wow, thank you so much. This helped me like so-and-so. And I remember I was at Shelf Road and I was climb two climbs left of Lats Have No Feeling. It's like some 511 and I just, do you know the
under a
name of it?
red sky, or I don't know. Yeah,
Something like that.
yeah.
It's like some 11B or something. And so we were just pulling the rope, and there's a group of, I would say, college age young adults like climbing on the route to the right of Let's Have No Feeling. And they had draws hung and they were giving tries at it. And so I'm kind of coiling the rope and I'm doing all this stuff. And this one woman who was kind of up next, she's tying in and she's getting ready. And she says to her belayer, they go through the safety check, and she says, well, either I'll fall or I won't. I got that from Vertical Mind. And I did one of these. I did one of these. And, we laughed and we high-fived and stuff. And I told him that there's nothing better as an author than to know that the work you did, the time that you put in helped somebody in some measurable way.
As a professor, for sure, that's the story of my life. I can help students not just learn something, but learn valuable skills that they'll take with them. Sometimes change their lives. I've got some former students I'm very, very proud of. A couple of them who are full professors now, or tenure track professors anyway. Others are doctors and things like that. So yeah, it's great helping other people. And again, just getting more enjoyment out of climbing. And I still say that to myself, I'm either going to fall or I'm not. And I know on this route, both are okay. I I use lots of things from Vertical Mind. When we were writing the book, I actually had my best season in many, many years, especially on sighting. And a lot of it's just I had all that stuff fresh in my head, and I'd sort of practiced it in a sense, or at least reviewed it while writing the book. And of course, I was super motivated because we were working on the book. But yeah, that was a standout season for me. So that's I almost think I need to go back and read it again.
So a lot has transpired since Vertical Mind came out. It's been out about 10 years, and it's had a lot of impact. And I think we both learned a lot since then, since it came out. We're immersed in climbing and doing workshops and things. And one of the things that has occurred to me, and I'd love to hear some of the things you've learned, is just how quickly some of these things, when applied, can actually show a result. I mean, I do these workshops, and we'll do like this pre-climb ritual that some of it's in the book and some I developed it afterwards. And some of these things in the workshop, within 2 or 4 hours, there's a noticeable difference in what people can do, how they're climbing. I mean, people are just blown away that in such a short amount of time, because it's not like lifting, right? You got to work a muscle and then you got to feed it and rest it. I mean, these are psychological or neuromuscular things that take shape
Mm-hmm.
really fast. So that's one thing I've really grown to appreciate about this particular kind of stuff that we cover in Vertical Mind.
Well, I mean, several other things. Technique is something that you can work all the time. Just visualizing a route just helps you with that technique so much. You can make so many gains without working your body. On a rest day, you can make gains there. And then, yeah, I think practicing managing those scripts, changing those scripts so that your approach is different, whether it's I'm going to fall or I'm not, or, I'm out here to have fun. That's number one. Or, there are lots of different ways you can reframe things. I think one of the most important that you see with all the best climbers is the definition of progress, which obviously we wrote a bunch about. But if or success is progress, any sort of progress, that totally reframes it in such a positive way, as opposed to success is clipping the chains. I mean, that's kept me going. I've been climbing, I think this is my 48th year or something like that of climbing, and it's no less fun than it was. Well, it's more fun in the first 10 years for a lot of those reasons.
And one of the things you alluded to is these things are like most training. It's a prescription, not an inoculation, right? If you don't continue to work on these things, they go away. It's just like any form of training. And there's a certain amount of, you got to go back and revisit these things. And I remember seeing Bobby Bensman in Rifle, and she actually had a copy of Vertical Mind, maybe the most used book we have, right?
Uh-huh.
She had all these like sticky notes, and it was all banged up, and she had it there with her in the, what is that key, the Arsenal. And I remember, hey, Bobby. And she's like, yeah, this is like my Bible. And she had earmarked, and she would go back and read those sections. So many of these things you got to go back to time and time again. And I too, I'll be like, gosh, I could really go back and work on my falling drills or work on my reinforce. Let's get doing that pre-climb ritual again consistently.
That's a really funny story because I used to climb with Bobby a fair amount around the time when she was competing, nationally. And uh, some of my interest in sort of the fear of failure is being around some of those people who were much better than I was in the competitive scene, and seeing somebody come in third place and just be like, oh, I'm a failure, oh, I'm no good, I didn't take first or second. And wow, that really got my attention. And that ended up being my research. I went to grad school after those days. I would have been in the 90s, and I went back to grad school in 99. And most of my research is around self-conscious emotions, shame, guilt, embarrassment, humiliation, fear of failure, rejection, all that stuff. So, yep, that story goes way back, and I'm glad to hear that she's enjoying the book.
Yeah, Sylvia and I were in Virginia. Actually, we were in North Carolina recently. One of my sisters was quite ill, and so we made the trip out there. And we happened to be in a gym in the southern part of Virginia, and somebody recognized Sylvia and came up and said, "Hey, are you an author?" So and we talked a little bit, and it's just so cool to see the impact of what that's really done. And so therefore, I wanted to kind of add more to it. like doing this podcast, and right now we're working on putting together a documentary series called Inside the Vertical Mind. And in fact, we did a pilot episode with Hazel Finley and Moab and focused on flow. And I know, Jeff, you've done a lot of research on flow.
Yeah, I'm up for sabbatical this year, so I'll be off for 8 months, starting in May, and I'm going to collect some more data on flow. But my last sabbatical was 6, 7 years ago, and that was my main focus. I had two very long surveys that lots of climbers were very patient about filling out. I had the return address as campsite 9, I believe it was, in Maple for a very long time. Collected data in Rifle and the Red, and anywhere I ran into climbers. And we looked at a whole lot of different aspects to flow. But the thing that I'm most excited about, the number one tip, was based on the literature, the match between challenge and ability. And that hadn't really been tested very well. I mean, how do you objectively quantify the challenge of gardening? Or interestingly, some of the earliest flow research, they looked at mountaineers, like why do people do these ridiculous things, put their lives at risk, for no gain, because flow is the ultimate example of intrinsic motivation. And they logged climbers' experiences of what they were doing during the day. But rock climbing is so different, right? It's so concentrated. We have a really good rating system where you can really drill down. Even like skiing, it's just so the level of measurement is rather crude with green or blue or black or whatever it is. So in climbing, we were able to really measure that, and the correlation was huge. It was about, for geeks who know that stuff, correlations run from 0 to 1, and the correlation was, I think, 0.76. So very, very strong predictor. The closeness of the match. So, if I'm on sighting 12A as my max at a given time, then I've got to climb something in that neighborhood to optimize the chances of flow. And I believe it's the best test that's in the literature. I need to re-review the literature now that I've got another sabbatical coming up. But I do think it's in some ways the most objective test, the most scientific test of that hypothesis. And the other thing that we found, and this was based a lot of it on personal experience, it kind of felt to me, just my own story, is that I was most likely to experience flow about 1 to 2 letter grades below my on-site max at any given time. And the data turned out almost exactly that way. The higher the grades you're climbing, the bigger the gap might be. I mean, if you're on-sighting 14A, then maybe your most likely flow experience might be as low as 13A or 13B. And if you're on-sighting 5.8, then it's probably 5.7 or 5.8. But yeah, very, very tight relationship between those two. And that's one way that we can help people who want to chase that flow experience.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to spend a couple of days with Hazel Finley and a couple of other climbers, guest climbers, for the Inside the Vertical Mind show. And they were working on their ability to find flow more often. And that was absolutely fantastic experience. And I can't wait to get that out into the world, hopefully sometime this year. And I look forward to you, Jeff, joining us on some of the upcoming shoots that we're hoping to start back up again in April or May, and get that series out into the world. So I'm so super excited about that.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the overlap between the data that I collected and what they say, because we found quite a few tips, that promote flow. They don't guarantee it, but you can definitely increase the probability of experiencing flow, especially when you keep those tips in mind and actually take the time to try to get them to all line up on a given climb.
And when I was sitting there, Hazel and I were sitting on this rock with Katie and Carolyn, who were the other 2 climbers, and we were talking about strategies for approaching a climb on the first time and after the first time, and different techniques and different strategies. And I'm like, this is like a freaking masterclass in lead climbing and on-sighting and red pointing. So I'm so excited to put that together and get it out there into the world. So I'd like to take another moment to shout out to Trango Climbing Equipment and Holds. They're one of our sponsors, and they have a great equipment that they sell, climbing equipment. There's ice climbing equipment, holds for your woody and your home wall, go to trango.com and see all that they have to offer. And our good friends over at Sharp End Publishing, who really were instrumental for Jeff and I in getting some of our thoughts, out into the world in the form of Vertical Mind. That's helped a lot of people. So thanks to our sponsors. So every episode, I hope to feature something about our fans, something about our audience that, questions or thoughts or stories. And I thought in this first episode, how appropriate it would be to have a guest come on that I actually met at the Crag when she came up and told me a story about her and Vertical Mind. So Katie, please join us. Katie Madden.
Hi.
Hey, Katie, welcome.
Hey, Katie.
Hi.
So I remember being at Shelf Road, and my wife Sylvia and I were climbing, and it was kind of quiet there that day. I think there was only maybe 10 people at the whole cliff that we were at. And what happened?
Well, so I was climbing with my husband and my climbing partner Casey. Um, and I was actually tying in, and I had seen you a couple of times, and I had whispered, I'm pretty sure that's the guy who wrote Vertical Mind. I think that's him. I'm pretty sure that's him. And then I heard Sylvia call you Dawn, and I was like, that's him. So naturally I walked over, and I think my introduction was, hey, are you Vertical Mind, Dawn? Are you the guy who wrote Vertical Mind? Sure enough, yeah, so that's how we met. And then, yeah, I just kind of told you my story about how Vertical Mind is hands down the reason that I started climbing again.
So, as I said before, there's nothing better being an author than to find out that your work, because it's hard. I mean, I won't sugarcoat it. Writing a book is hard work, even if you only wrote half of the book, So, and so to have someone come up and say how it's impacted them, I was almost in tears, to be honest with you. It made that much of an impact on me. And you share with us your story. I don't want to recount it. I want you to tell the story.
Yeah, no, yeah. So it's a little unique. My accident happened in a gym. We were climbing in Wyoming in a gym. 2014. It was 10 years in January. And we were climbing, and it was just the rules of the gym. We had to be using an ATC on lead. And I should preface this with my partner. At that point, we had climbed Devil's Tower probably 6 times together. Super solid partner, super great. We'd been outside, trusted him wholeheartedly. And we were in the gym, and I was at the top of the climbing wall, and he thought that I had clipped my anchors, and I hadn't. And he went to take at the same time I fell, and I ended up falling 45 feet and broke my back, got 3 compression fractures in my back. So yeah,
Wow.
so that was
had to be devastating.
It was terrifying. I can remember the very first thing I did when I was laying there on the ground was wiggle my toes. I can remember, somebody immediately came and put me in C-spine, and I was in nursing school at the time. And so I kind of knew a little bit about what could go wrong. At the end of the day, I got really lucky. It could have been a lot worse than it was. And so, yeah, I just remember laying there on the ground and wiggling my toes, and my toes moved. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, that's progress. So that was quite the healing process. Physically that took a long time, but mentally, it was almost 7 years before I got back into climbing. So it was quite the journey.
So what got you back into climbing?
Well, I loved climbing. So I started climbing when I was in nursing school. I went to nursing school in Gillette, Wyoming. Like I said, I was right there near Devil's Tower. My first outdoor climb was in Spearfish Canyon. Just really great climbing in the area, and I really loved it. And I knew that I loved it, and so I wanted to get back to it. Like you guys talk about the fear of falling and the fear of failing, it was strong for a really long time. And then I just got lucky enough to get involved with some other people who really loved climbing and who were really patient with me getting back into it. And so now here we are. Gosh, I've been back to about 3.5 years, and it's been good.
And I can testify you are back at it.
Yeah, thanks. I just led my second 11D outside the other day, so I'm pretty stoked about that. Yeah, we're getting
Congratulations.
there. Yeah,
progress always feels good.
In that time, in those 7 years off, I think that I read Vertical Mind 6 times probably. I'm on my second copy because I had my first copy that I used to like highlight and rehighlight and rehighlight, and pretty soon people wanted to borrow it, but I didn't want them to have my copy that I knew what all the things meant in it. So now I have my copy that I've noted and copy that I lend out to all my friends sometimes.
Jeff has never heard this story, so I'm so happy that the three of us got to get together so Jeff could hear this.
It is the reason that I got back into climbing.
No, I'm so glad you're okay physically and back at it. That's fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah, it's there's just a lot of parts of it that I still stick with, like the pre-climb ritual. We all learn in climbing, right? You do your buddy checks, you make sure everything's safe, but then a lot of it is um I do a lot of like I focus on box breathing a lot, and then I focus on like my thought replacement is big. I'm still terrified of falling. Um so just like working through that in the beginning of it, and kind of like you talked about, either I'll fall or I won't. That's how it's gonna go.
I'm curious how you found Vertical Mind, Katie.
I think that I was just researching how to get back into climbing, because I knew that so much of it was psychological. The fitness, the physical aspect is pretty okay, and the like my technique's just fine. I knew that I was terrified of falling. And so I think I was just looking it up and I came across it, and so then I bought it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent stuff. So
Yeah, but it's
then you
been great.
started putting it into practice.
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember like one of the first things you started putting into practice?
The very first thing that I made myself do was start falling again. It's kind of like this idea of you get thrown off a horse and you get back on. When I was 6, I was riding a horse in an arena with my cousin, got thrown off the back of it, knocked out 2 of my teeth, and my mom immediately made me get back on the horse to ride over to the water fountain to like wash my mouth out. And it was kind of like that, like it really was to the point I first started falling underneath bolts, which is a tiny little bit of slack, just to be like, okay, they're gonna catch me. And then I worked myself up to, waist at the bolt at my waist, and then I'd go above the bolt to the next one, and that was huge for me. Um, yeah, so that's kind of where I started, and then it was just like piecing it together and kind of focusing on the little things. I think I told you, Dawn, um, when I first was kind of getting back into climbing, especially lead climbing, I was over gripping for the life of me, because in my brain I was like, well, the tighter I hold on to it, the better I'll stay, which we all know is completely backwards. Um, but so that is something that I also continue to think about a lot. Like when I get really nervous, I take a second, I shake out, I kind of hold on a little lighter. And I think that's really helpful. Like we're just working on that technique and paying a lot of attention to that. Yeah. Well, and it's funny to me how much it evolves over time. When I first started climbing before I got injured, I was really gung ho, trying to push grades, trying to get stronger. That's kind of what my focus was. And now it's really evolved into, in the book you guys talk about, part of it is like not remembering that climbing it's just a part of your personality and who you are. Um, and like right now I'm in grad school. I just opened a business. I just got married. I have 4 dogs. I have a lot of things going on. So climbing has really kind of fallen by the wayside. Um, but it's a lot easier for me to recognize that, like climbing is now just something that I love, and it's something that gets me out of the house and I get to hang out with my friends, and it's okay that I'm not climbing as hard as I anticipated that I would. You kind of can put it into these different little boxes. I feel like climbing is just like a really malleable part of life, if you will.
One thing that I've grown to have more of an appreciation for, as I get a little more gray, is that when you first start climbing, you tend to improve, pretty steadily, and then life happens. And one thing that you'll learn if you stay with this for a long time is that there's kind of ups and downs. There's ebbs and flows, whether it's due to a new job, going to a different school, things happen in your life, relationship kind of things happen. You get other things that take your time and attention away from climbing. So I actually find that a wonderful aspect of climbing. I love it. Like right now I'm recovering from an elbow issue that I had. And I'm able to get on climbs that a year ago may have been kind of warm-ups, and now are challenging and they're fun. And it's something I've grown to appreciate. Sometimes I have more fun getting back in shape than I do when I'm actually in really good shape and climbing hard.
Well, and I think the people you meet and the relationships you form are equally as important. Like they're just such a huge part of climbing. I've had climbing partners. I can remember one time we were climbing at Shelf Road and my sister had come down to climb with us. And I had this specific climbing partner, and at the time, it was the first 10 that I had gotten on lead since my injury. And I can remember it's a 10B and there's a little roof to pull. And I can remember my sister was trying to encourage me, and I heard my climbing partner go, "No, just give her some silence." He goes, I can tell by the tone of her voice what's going on in her head and what she needs. And I feel like you don't really get to develop those relationships in most other things outside of climbing. So I think that the way that you get to relate to people, and like my husband I met climbing, my climbing partner Casey, who was with me, you've talked to her, Dawn. I trust her intrinsically more than almost anybody else on this planet, because I know that she is so in tune with what I'm doing when I'm on the other end of the rope, that it just takes that fear factor out of it completely for me.
When we introduce this podcast, it's about psychological and social aspects of climbing. And one of the things that I've grown really, really curious about, because I think we're in the middle of a shift, or we're certainly seeing a shift. When I first started climbing back in the 90s, you climbed typically with one partner, and a party of three just kind of slowed you down. And most of us didn't really like that. We wanted to get in a lot of climbing. And I think there's a shift. And probably some of it's due to the advent of the climbing gyms, where people climb more in packs, and it's a very social atmosphere. And I'm seeing more and more of that out at the crags. And I think we are seeing more and more of that. And so I've really become very curious about this, and I'd like to understand a little bit more about that. So that's why I would like to feature social aspects of climbing, different perspectives of why people get together and climb. So for anybody out there who's a fan of Vertical Mind, I'd love to hear from you. If you have a story to share, if you have questions, comments, a favorite song, whatever it is that you would like shared, every one of these episodes, I'll be featuring something. And if it's a question, we'll do our best to address them. If it's a story, heck, maybe you'll come on like Katie and be on the podcast to share your story. So just reach out to Don at verticalmind.show. That's email Don at verticalmind.show. You can also find me on Instagram also. So if you just go to Inside the Vertical Mind, just you can message me, and I'm the guy behind the curtain on Inside the Vertical Mind Instagram. So go ahead and just message me. I'd love to hear from you. Another thing that Jeff and I are in discussions on, I'm a big journaler. I don't know. Do you journal, Katie? Do you do any journaling?
Inconsistently.
Okay. So I'm a big journaler, and I think many people journal, and I find it very, very helpful. And so Jeff and I are going to put together a Vertical Mind daily journal. So that's specifically designed for climbers to track the things they want to track, reflect on where they are with their climbing, and other aspects of their life. We'll have some information about why you might want to journal and some of the things that you'll get from journaling. We'll have some gratitude journaling, some information about that. And I'm a big believer, and it's always been helpful to keep me focused. So keep your eyes open for that. Hopefully in 2024, if not early 2025, a Vertical Mind daily journal coming your way. So that cool. We're super, super excited about that. So anything to add, Jeff or Katie, as we get ready to close things up?
I mean, just a huge thanks for you guys putting your brains together and making this book. I think it's doing a lot more for people than you guys probably ever could have even imagined when you were writing it, but we're all glad it's here.
That's it for this episode of the Inside the Vertical Mind podcast. I want to thank you, Jeff, for joining me on this first episode. And thank you, Katie, for being in our first ever fan corner. I'm sure a lot of people got great stuff out of your story. All right, this is Don McGrath. Till next time.
You've been listening to the Inside the Vertical Mind podcast, hosted by Don McGrath. We leave with a quote from Alex Lowe. The best climber at the crag is the one having the most fun. Until next time, climb on.